Oh, snap. Welcome back to the channel, y'all. My name's Patrick. If you like true crime, YouTube, hit the thumbs up button, hit the subscribe button. Do all the things. Welcome in. We're live on TikTok as well. Did a little pre-show over there.
You what?
Yup. Welcome in, y'all. Good to see everybody. Thanks for being here. This one, so it's Annie Elise, by the way. Make sure you go follow Annie Elise. She's pinned down in the description of the video. But this is one that she posted a few days ago, I think, talking about the unalive, because we're live on TikTok, of Karen Buckley. So, y'all, make sure you go follow her. She's amazing. She's pinned in the description. But let's take a listen to this. Here we go.
In 2015, Karen Buckley had a fair complexion, round cheeks, and long dark hair. And when I say long hair, I mean long. Like well past her shoulders, almost midway down to her waist. It was that sort of in-between texture, a little wavy. So sometimes she'd curl it, and other times it would hang down straight. In a lot of the pictures you see of her, she'd sort of tilt her head to the side when she smiled, like it was her go-to pose. It was cute. Karen was 24 years old and worked in Glasgow, Scotland as a nurse. She was also part of a program that trained her to get into occupational therapy.
Oh, see, I was like, that doesn't look like the States. Scotland, and she's a nurse. Shout out to the nurses. Desiree, thank you. Y'all, that's what we need right now. Hit me with them. Somebody else must have got one too.
She'd just started her classes in February of 2015, so she was pretty new to it. But it was also clear that Karen had a big, bright future ahead of her. She had goals and wanted a good career, and she was working to make it happen. Karen was also a little bit of a risk taker. Not too much. I mean, she was responsible. She wasn't the kind of person who was regularly doing things that seemed crazy or reckless.
She was a risk taker. Not really. She was very responsible and didn't take any risk, but she was a risk taker.
But she did travel a lot, all over the world. She knew life had a lot to offer, and she wanted to get a taste of everything that she could. She'd grown up in a small town in Ireland. I've done a lot of research, and I've found conflicting information about whether she had any brothers or sisters. She either had 3 or 0, big discrepancy, I know. When she got older, she studied internationally, traveling to
She was either a risk taker or not a risk taker.
All kinds of different countries to try and kickstart her career. Then came the move to Glasgow in February with the new job and the occupational therapy program. By mid-April, she'd only been in Glasgow for about 2 months. She certainly hadn't put down roots or built up a huge social network or anything. But Karen was still pretty easy to like. She had her friends, and they'd go out on weekends to unwind. So, on the night of Saturday, April 11th, that's exactly what happened. Karen went out with 3 friends. They were all originally from Ireland. They all were in the same program now, and they all lived on the same street. I mean, they had a lot in common. That night, they all took a picture together at one of their homes. Then they hit a nightclub called Sanctuary and got there a little before 11:30 p.m. They waited in line for about 20 minutes to get in, then finally made it inside the club at a quarter to midnight. I think it's pretty
the hell's wrong with Scotland? Girls have to wait to get in clubs?
pretty obvious that they were
How dare you?
planning to stay out late. I mean, you don't show up to a club at 11:45 unless you're fully prepared and planning to dance the night away. And Karen and her friends didn't have any other plans that night. They weren't bar hopping. The idea was that they'd go to Sanctuary, and when they were done there, they'd head back home. At around 1 a.m. or so, Karen said she had to use the bathroom. So she got up and left her jacket on her chair, right by where her friends were sitting. I mean, she obviously planned to come right back. Except Karen never did come back. It was like she'd just disappeared. Of course, as the night went on, Karen's friends were pretty freaked out. I've got to imagine they might have sent someone into the bathroom to see if she was still in there, if she felt sick, if she'd met someone, or something else had happened. But she wasn't there. She wasn't at another booth.
Met someone.
Flirting with a guy or anything. Nobody knew where she'd gone. And by the next morning, her friends knew for a fact that Karen never came home. Like I mentioned before, they all lived on the exact same street, so it wasn't like they had to go way out of their way to knock on her door, try to buzz into her apartment. But she never answered. There were no signs that she'd been home all day. So after they did all of the things, checked her house, tried calling and texting, it was about noon the next day, April 12th. And that's when they finally reported Karen missing to the police. I'm happy to say the investigators took the disappearance very seriously right off the bat. There was no sitting around waiting for 24 hours or 48 hours or whatever to pass. No pointless delays the way you get with some of these cases. The other piece of good news is that the bar where Karen went missing, it had security cameras all over on the outside. And in practically no time at all, just about a day, the investigators managed to find video that showed what happened to Karen after she got up to use the bathroom. See, at 1 a.m., she was outside the bar walking down the street toward where her car was parked. And I'm just going to be honest right here, I have no idea how or why she ended up outside at all. I covered all of this before. She left her coat behind. She'd been having fun with her friends. No one has ever come forward and said how she got from using the bathroom to just leaving without saying goodbye or explaining what was going on. The point is, however she ended up out there, she was walking away from the club. She literally crossed the street. I mean, she wasn't just getting some fresh air. She wasn't outside for a cigarette or trying to get cell phone service if it was hard to get a signal inside or too loud to talk to someone. She was leaving. So Karen walked across the street, and there she sort of bumped into this guy. He was wearing all black. He had dark hair. He was white. The cameras got a pretty good look at him, especially because it's not like he just popped up in a few frames and then left.
A pretty good look at him. I can't even tell that that's a person. Can y'all tell that that's a person? Oh, wait, hold on. That's an ear right there, isn't it? He's like looking that way. Never mind, I kind of see it.
He actually stood around and talked to Karen for a while. I wish we actually knew what they were saying. But after they spoke for a while, the two of them presumably got into a car together. Not Karen's car. It seemed like it probably belonged to the man. Now, the police didn't physically see him and Karen get into a car, but they still managed to figure out which one was his based on other footage of a car driving away from Sanctuary right afterward. Basically, there hadn't been any other cars matching its description coming that way before. No one else had left in the right time frame. So just by process of elimination, they knew Karen and the man had to be in that specific car. They headed off down the road in the direction toward Karen's home. So maybe the guy was giving her a ride back from the club, not wanting her to have to walk the whole way alone in the dark late at night. Except then, the car drove for about 5 minutes. Not very long at all. It went by another security camera on a street called Kelvin Way, and it left the frame for 12 minutes and 46 seconds. When it drove back out, it popped up on camera again. At first, I found this next part kind of confusing when I was doing my research. I don't exactly know my way around Glasgow, Scotland, so I'm going to put a map up on screen because I think it's helpful to see where all of these places are. Once I saw everything all together on the map, it all made more sense. So okay, Karen was in the car with the guy she met at the Sanctuary nightclub. They drove to Kelvin Way, which is right by a big park. It was just a few minutes away from the club. Then, after that 12-minute gap where you couldn't see the car on a security camera, the car headed toward a place called Doss Holm Park, which is about a 15-minute drive away from the club and Kelvin Way. This was important.
Oh, man, why were they driving to a park after the club? Uh-oh. By the way, TikTok, hit the follow button if you're new here. Keep tapping the screen. Thank you for those little bubblegum things. YouTube, hit the subscribe button. Everybody watching on YouTube, hit the thumbs up button too. That's massive for YouTube. The more thumbs up, the more the algorithm spreads the stream out to more people. So take a second, hit the thumbs up button for me. All right, let's keep going.
Because the next morning, early, before Karen's friends had even declared her missing, a woman found Karen's purse in a garbage can by the park's entrance. She eventually turned it over to the police, so they had one more piece of evidence connecting Karen to that car. It's not like Doss Holm Park was so incredibly far away. 15 minutes in the car is no time at all. But I do find it interesting that Doss Holm Park is kind of the opposite direction from Kelvin Way. In other words, the guy who gave Karen a ride was heading toward her house for the first 5 or 6 minutes of the drive. Then he went out of view of those security cameras, and after that he turned around and headed away from Karen's place. And then, at 7 a.m. the next morning, her purse was on the other side of the city. I mean, this was all suspicious as hell. After the car was driven away from the park, it went to a residential neighborhood in Glasgow where it was parked. This was right around 2 in the morning, which meant everything else, the trip to Kelvin Way, the trip to the park, everything only took about an hour. So, of course, the next step was to figure out who that car belonged to. Since the police know the person driving this car was one of the last, if not the last people to see Karen before she went missing, he was worth talking to. The good news is, like I said, he was on camera for a while. The detectives had a very good picture of his face from a bunch of different angles. And they also knew about his car, its make, model, license plate number, all of the things. It took no time at all for the cops to identify this guy. By Monday, April 13th, just one day after Karen was reported missing, they knew his name was Alexander Pacto. He was 21 years old and had lived in Glasgow his whole life. And guys, let me just say, Alexander was not a good guy. He was basically the last person you'd want to get into a car with alone after dark. He'd had it good when he
Oh, hell.
was growing up. Think of living in a fancy house in a nice neighborhood and going to a fancy private school. Eventually, his parents got a divorce, and that was the end of his time in the private school. But other than that, there was nothing traumatic about his background. Nothing that you'd expect to put him on a road to becoming a violent creep. He was socially awkward and didn't have very many friends, but he did have some friends. He wasn't a total loner. Except, not long before the night Karen got into his
That's a crazy looking picture.
car and then went missing, Alexander served time in prison for counterfeiting money, and this wasn't some brilliant criminal scheme or anything. Alexander literally just scanned some paper bills and then printed out that picture. He actually thought that would work. Instead, he got caught pretty much immediately and was sentenced
You what?
That's dumb.
to 225 hours of community service, and that wasn't even the most serious charge that was brought against him. He was also accused of sexual assault in 2011. The
Blah, 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 blah. Damn it. TikTok overlords, entertainment and educational purposes only.
victim was a 24-year-old woman whose name hasn't been made public, but allegedly she was leaving a club one night and waiting for a cab to come pick her up. The police believe that Alexander was also leaving the club at about the same time, and he told her, "How about we split the next cab, rather than both of us having to wait for separate ones?" Now, it isn't entirely clear what happened next,
Oh, hell.
whether they actually got into a cab together, or whether what happened next was before the cab got there. But somehow Alexander and the woman found themselves in an alley together. And the allegations are that Alexander attacked her and tried to sexually assault her. He didn't actually succeed because the reports say that
Sorry, y'all. If TikTok hears certain words, they get mad as hell at the channel.
some people passing by saw what was going on and intervened to stop the attack. Alexander actually went to trial on those charges in 2013, but he beat the rap. He was found not guilty. After that, he bounced around from house to house for a while.
The hell?
He lived with his mom for a bit, but it didn't work out. Then he was staying with his dad until his dad kicked him out because, according to a rumor, Alexander couldn't get along with his dad's girlfriend. Since it wasn't an option to live with either of his parents, Alexander ended up moving into an apartment with some randos. These people weren't friends, they were just people who needed a new roommate, a guy and a girl. And it sounds like around this time, if not earlier, Alexander went full-on incel. I mean, think about every stereotype you've heard about incel weirdo losers. That's who Alexander was. He gorged himself on fast food. He bounced around from odd job to odd job, but couldn't hold anything down long term. He hired sex workers because that was the only—
Jeez, Louise. Annie, at least you used to cut out all the words you can't say on social media platforms. Hex. They're talking about hex, putting hexes on people.
way he could get someone to sleep with him.
Ah!
He whined constantly about how unfair it was that nobody would date him. I wonder why women weren't flocking to this unemployed man-child alleged rapist.
Grape. Oh my God. Annie Elise. What happened? I used to have to not censor and like watch your videos and like take out all the words you can't say. What happened? Those were the good old days. All right. This guy's a crazy. He's a weirdo.
Remember how one of Alexander's roommates was a woman? He made creepy comments to her all the time. Whenever she'd have guests over who were men, he'd talk about how he was listening in case he could hear sex sounds coming from her bedroom.
Entertainment and educational purposes only.
Yes, really. At one point, he even lied and told someone—
Y'all hit me with some bubblegum action before TikTok gets real mad. We're trying to hit 100 of them. We got 15. Plenty more to go, y'all. Right there. Hit me with them. Let's do it.
that she was his girlfriend, and she was like, "That's enough red flags. I can't be alone with this guy ever." So if the other roommate was out of the apartment, she'd find an excuse to be gone too, because she did not feel safe being around Alexander.
Why wouldn't you just kick that dude out? Why would you have a roommate that you don't feel safe rooming with?
Which was fair because apparently
Yeah, we love the TikTok shop. Exactly, y'all. Just say it over and over again. Desiree, thank you.
he was also telling his friends these weird, braggy stories about how he'd figured out how to commit the perfect murder. He said he'd kill someone, then dissolve their body in a barrel of acid. As near as I can tell, that
Oh, wow. Okay, you watched Breaking Bad.
was his whole plan. Body, acid, quote, perfect murder.
Nope, that's Breaking Bad.
Which, on top of being a creepy thing to say, was also just so stupid. I mean, if you've been watching my channel for any amount of time, you know how many different ways the police have caught killers. It's not as easy as saying killed someone, destroyed the body, I'm good. It's almost funny that his plan went exactly that far and then stopped because he thought it was already perfect. But anyway, now on the night that Karen went missing, Alexander was out at the same place as her, the Sanctuary Nightclub. He was there with 7 friends who all met up beforehand so they could go out together.
Wait, he had 7 friends that he met up with? That is crazy. Ashley, thank you. Y'all bubblegumming up. Thank you. Let's get it. Almost there.
There were too many people to fit in one car, so they called 2 taxis. Except only one cab actually showed up. So 5 guys piled into that one, and then Alexander drove himself and the last 2 friends in his own car. Then the rest of the night, he was in and out of the club a couple times. He'd be at the booth with his friends, drinking and having a good time. Then he'd get up and go outside without telling anyone what he was up to. Then back inside, back to the good time, then back outside again. The second time he got up and left, it was around 1 a.m., and we know, thanks to the CCTV footage, that was also when he met Karen on the street and gave her a ride, which you have to notice the similarity between that and his earlier alleged rape, right?
Grape.
Both times, Alexander...
Jesus. Mary and Joseph. He's got grapes and grape soda. TikTok overlords and YouTube overlords.
reportedly approached a strange woman as she was leaving a bar and sort of intercepted her before she could get a cab home. It's a pattern. So the question then becomes, how did Karen end up getting in his car? They didn't know each other, they'd never talked on the phone or connected on social media. To me, it seems pretty unlikely that Alexander just decided to be a gentleman and give a strange woman a ride home, because there were 2 other people who were also depending on him to get home, the 2 friends he drove there. I mean, I guess it wouldn't be the end of the world for them to call a taxi since that was the original plan anyway. But it does sound weird, right? Like, did this guy really just abandon his friends to drive around some other woman he just met? And was Karen really that chill about getting into a car with a man she didn't know? The other possibility is that Alexander picked Karen up. You know, I could see a lot of guys ditching their friends to find their own way home if they'd met someone. But the question then is, what happened to Karen after she got into his car? Why'd her purse end up in that trash can in a park that, for the record, was only 1 mile away from Alexander's apartment? The police wanted to give Alexander a chance to tell his story, so they called him at home sometime on Monday. This was the day after Karen was reported missing, and the same day Alexander was identified as the guy from the CCTV footage. He didn't pick up, no big deal, he could have been at work or out running errands or something. So the detectives figured they'd try again later. Well, at 6 p.m. that evening, the police finally got a hold of Alexander. This time, they didn't just call him, they physically went to his apartment and knocked on the door. When he opened it, it was like, bam! This strong smell of bleach just hit the officers in the face. When the investigators went inside, they got a peek into Alexander's bedroom. They saw that he had a brand new mattress, and it was clearly the wrong size for his bed frame, almost like he'd gone out and bought it in a hurry and he didn't even have the time to double check that it would fit. They could also see that Alexander had scratches and cuts all over his arms. And when they searched his pockets, which I guess is standard before an interrogation in Glasgow, they found his phone and a ton of receipts. Alexander had been shopping and Googling and texting, and it all looked bad. So Karen got into Alexander's car a little after 1 a.m. on Sunday, April 12th. 7 hours later, at 8 a.m. the same day, he hopped on his phone and Googled sodium hydroxide. Here in America, we call it lye. It can burn your skin if you touch it, but it's also a really powerful cleaner. They use it in a lot of soaps and things. And Alexander wasn't just looking it up because he was curious, having one of those nights where he was looking up random stuff while he couldn't sleep. No, he was specifically looking up sodium hydroxide and clicking links that answered questions like, how bad would it burn you if it touched it? What kinds of things can it break down or not break down? Those sorts of questions. Then, an hour and a half later,
you are crazy as hell.
At 9:42, he went out and bought a whole bunch of lye, specifically 6 whole liters of it. His shopping trip was caught on a CCTV security camera, so it was obviously him doing it. And in addition to the lie, he also got some gloves and a mask, which makes sense because it can be dangerous to even breathe this stuff. It's serious. Jump forward roughly another hour and a half, so to 11 a.m. now. He went to a different store and bought even more lye. And I'm not sure why he went to a whole different store. Maybe he bought everything they had in stock at the first place. Maybe he thought it would look less suspicious to go to a bunch of different places. So there wouldn't be one salesperson asking, "What do you need all this lye for, dude?" But if that was the goal, it didn't work for him.
He's like, nothing. And then they're like, are you lying? No.
On the security cameras. The cops knew what he was doing. He looked so suspicious. This whole time, Alexander also was texting his male roommate. I guess the guy Alexander lived with wasn't home that day. He was hiking with some family members, and Alexander wanted to know when he was going to get back.
Oh my God. Can you imagine coming home and you had a roommate and your roommate just had done this and the person's there covered in lye? Man, that would be crazy.
He said he was asking because he'd locked himself out and needed help getting back.
He's like, I think this is grounds to break my lease.
Inside. But it's safe to say that was a lie, because when Alexander's roommate said he wouldn't be back until later that evening, around 8, Alexander didn't beg him to rush back or call a landlord to ask for a spare key or anything. He was like, "Oh, really? You're gone all day? Huh, great. Thanks for letting me know. Bye." And I mean, when the roommate did get back at 8:15, not too long after he'd predicted, Alexander was inside. He wasn't locked out, and the roommate caught him cleaning like crazy. Just scrubbing the whole place down in a frenzy. I don't know where the female roommate was during all this, but knowing what I do about how she didn't like being home alone with Alexander, I'm guessing she heard the male roommate was going to be gone all day, and she got the hell out of there. Just my guess, but it makes sense.
It does. By the way, TikTok, hit the follow button. Andrea, good to see you. Thanks for the bubble gum. Y'all hit me with them. TikTok, hit the follow button. If you're new, keep tapping the screen. Let's get 25,000 likes. YouTube, everybody watching, hit the thumbs up button. Thanks for the love. Y'all, hit the subscribe button if you like true crime. I'm live every night, virtually every night. Welcome in, y'all. Hit the thumbs up button. Let's go.
The next day, Monday, Alexander bought even more cleaning supplies, including even more lye. I mean, the amount of lye this guy was running through, it was insane. And he wasn't just cleaning the apartment, he also went to a car wash. All to say, Alexander was looking pretty darn suspicious, obviously.
That is craing. Taylor, yep, bubble gumming it up. That's it.
You don't take a woman home and then buy those kinds of heavy-duty cleaning supplies right after she goes missing unless you've got something to hide, right? Well, he told the police
or something to clean
that yes, he did pick Karen up outside of the club on Saturday night, or to be technical, Sunday morning.
Okay, so at what point did you first see Karen?
Outside the club. I met her outside the sanctuary on Saturday night. Sunday morning at about, it was around 1 o'clock.
You say you were in the Sanctuary nightclub on the Saturday night into the Sunday morning. When did you arrive there at the Sanctuary nightclub?
About 20 past 11.
Okay, and who were you with?
I was with 7 friends of mine. They'd all been up to my house before we went to the Sanctuary.
Okay, good for him. At least he wasn't lying and pretending he'd never met Karen. But to my mind, that was the only thing he was honest about. So according to Alexander, Karen got in the car with him for a random hookup. He drove her to his apartment where they had sex. No drama.
Rex. They had T-Rex. They had a T-Rex. They built one.
Nothing weird.
Sorry, TikTok overlords.
At least not at first. Alexander said that Karen stayed at his place for a few hours until 4 in the morning. Around then, while they were in bed, having a good time if you're picking up what I'm putting down, she ended up hitting her head on the headboard. It didn't seem serious, but Alexander also didn't get a good look at the injury either. From the sound of it, Karen decided to head home after that, so Alexander told her bye and then went to
This dude is crazy as hell.
Sleep. He didn't offer her a ride to her place, which does sound like a pretty massive dick move to me, but Karen lived close by, and apparently, according to Alexander, she was fine just walking back on her own. The next morning, he woke up, and when he looked around his apartment with the sun up and the light coming in, he saw blood all over his mattress. Alexander told the cops that he realized Karen had hit her head way worse than he'd realized. She must have been bleeding all over everything without him even noticing before she went home. Alexander said that was why he was Googling lye, and then going out and buying so many cleaning products.
Bruh.
That is the worst story I think I've ever heard in my life. Oh yeah, she just hit her head and I didn't notice it. Oh wait, there's all that blood. Wait, that much? Really? Wow.
All morning long. He was just trying to get rid of the blood, but none of it worked. There was too much blood and it wouldn't come out. Then, according to Alexander, he saw the news at some point and realized that Karen was missing. So the next thing he did was panic. In the statement he gave to the police, he said that he wasn't thinking straight and he decided he needed to destroy the mattress. So he...
That's suspicious. That's weird.
Oh man, she hit her head. What should I do? Tell somebody? Nope. Destroy the mattress. What an idiot.
drove off into a forest where he set it on fire, along with some clothes he'd been wearing that had also gotten bloody. Again, this is a statement Alexander voluntarily gave to try and make
What an idiot.
himself look innocent.
For doing it. I mean, he's dumb. That's dumb. He's dumb as hell for saying that, but thank God he did. So it's obviously an open and shut case, but just what an idiot. That's, well, wow.
But still, he insisted he was innocent. He didn't know what happened to Karen after she left his place, if someone else had hurt her, or if she got lost because her head injury had left her dazed. This was all just a lot of bad luck for him, but he didn't
Oh my God.
do anything wrong. Now, I want to pause here and ask, does anyone who's watching right now actually believe that? I'm assuming the answer is no, because let's be real here. That story sounds like a load of BS. I want to say something stronger, but you know YouTube censors. There's one other detail I want to
Yes, we do.
touch on before I move on. Alexander said he panicked because he couldn't get all of the blood out of his mattress. But if that was true, why did he get the car washed? Was he trying to argue that there was just so much blood on the mattress that he got it on his car when he drove it off to the woods to burn it? I mean,
He drove his mattress into the woods to burn it?
Alexander said that when Karen hit her
Man,
head,
you are going to prison.
he didn't see
But it's the UK, so what, is he going to get like 18 months or something like that?
any obvious injuries. Sure, he wasn't exactly checking her over and giving her a really thorough exam, but even if you're not really looking for it, I don't see how you miss a massive head wound where someone bleeds so much that their blood soaks through the mattress, and
Yeah, and how do you get that on a headboard?
then the mattress is dripping and oozing blood the next day.
Yeah, that you crazy as hell. I mean, even going full Christian Grey, you're not going to have that traumatic of a head injury.
It was just too ridiculous. Except if you were to ask the police who were investigating Karen's case, apparently they bought it because they had a press conference along with Karen's parents the very next day.
They bought
We
it?
just want Karen home safely. We are desperate.
At that same conference, a spokesperson for the police said that Alexander wasn't a suspect. To be clear, they didn't say anything about Alexander by name. They just described him as the man who Karen went home with. They also said that they were looking at other avenues of investigation. They didn't think Karen had disappeared willingly. They were worried about her safety. They also asked for tips about another car they'd identified as being relevant to the case.
So dude has all this blood in his apartment, burns his mattress and his clothes in the woods, and makes up some crazy story, and they're like, we should pursue other leads. We're not going to spend any I don't know why he went that way, but what?
You what?
That is crazy.
A gray Ford Focus, and that was that. Now, I would love to be able to see the comments while I'm recording this video. I'm sure there are a lot of people out there with strong opinions who think it's pretty ridiculous for the police to basically rule out Alexander when his alibi was so shitty. For those people, I have good news. You know how sometimes the police will purposefully say something that's not true in those kinds of conferences? They don't want the real killer to know how much they know? Well, that was absolutely the case here, even while the police were saying things like how they didn't just
Oh, so it was a tactic to keep him around.
see Alexander as a suspect. He was actually the main suspect. The person they really, truly believed did it. The only issue was getting enough evidence to justify an arrest, and the way the police did it, guys, it is amazing to me what we can tell with technology these days. So let's talk some more about that car wash Alexander got. He took his car to a professional detailer. I mean, it's not like he was hosing it down himself in his driveway. He didn't go to one of those automatic places with the big rollers of soap that come down and spray water and soap on your car. This was a professional, someone
Annie Elise described a car wash.
One who really knew what they were doing. So this detailer scrubbed every single inch of the car. They made the paint shine. They vacuumed the
Whoa.
inside. It looked almost
Oh man, the detailer had to be like, yo, is this blood? That's a lot.
new when they were done with it. But even with this pro being very thorough, there was one part of the car that they didn't clean, the tires. I mean, it sort of makes sense. The second the car was done and Alexander
If I get my car detailed and they don't do the tires, I'm gonna be mad as hell.
drove away, those tires were going to be rolling over roads again and getting dirty almost instantly. Why would a professional car washer waste a ton of time and energy and soap taking care of tires that wouldn't stay clean anyway? Well, it's a good thing they didn't.
What? That sounds horrible. Anybody from the UK, they don't wash the tires when you get your car washed?
Because after Alexander gave that truly bizarre story about Karen hitting her head and bleeding on the mattress, some detectives decided to check Alexander's car out. They collected soil samples from the treads to see if they could tell exactly where Alexander had been driving recently. Because you see, dirt isn't just dirt. I mean, you could go outside in your yard and grab a handful of it, and then get some dirt from somewhere else, a park, a playground, your neighbor's garden. They're going to be different. Some areas have more sand, some have more clay, different kinds of soil and things. There's just a lot of variation. There are actually experts who can look at dirt and tell you exactly where it came from. Not just generally, like this
is the dirtiest dirt I've ever seen.
is from Scotland or this is Glasgow. In some cases, they can pinpoint an actual address, and the dirt on Alexander's car, it came from Dossholm Park where Karen's purse had been
Oh my god.
found in that dumpster. Now, all that really meant was that Alexander had driven to a park that was close to his house, not very damning on its own, even with Karen's disappearance. But while teams were going through the park with a fine-toothed comb looking for new clues, some other detectives also tested Alexander's shoes to see if they could get any soil off of them too. And there was dirt on his shoes. But it wasn't from Dossholm Park. It was from a place outside of Glasgow called High Craigton Farm. So let me lay out the timeline here. The police questioned Alex on Monday evening. He told that weird story about Karen hitting her head. They didn't believe it, so they searched his apartment and got the soil samples Monday night, well, technically Tuesday morning, because the search started a couple of minutes before midnight. Tuesday was also the day when they gave the press conference saying Alexander wasn't a suspect, which we now know was a lie. And on Wednesday, the day after the press conference, a tipster called the police. This man, whose name hasn't been released to the public, reached out at about 3 in the afternoon. He said first he recognized the silver car that the police described in their press conference when they were asking for tips. It belonged to Alexander, which the police knew already. They knew which car was Alexander's, and they'd known that since day one. Like I said, that whole press conference had been a misdirect, with the cops pretending they didn't know as much as they did. They'd been trying to get tipsters to
lying.
feel comfortable coming forward, and it worked because this caller also said that Alexander used to rent a storage unit on High Craigton Farm. Apparently, back in the day, Alexander and this guy needed to buy fireworks for their job. Don't ask me what that job was, if they were selling them,
Yeah, what the hell?
or making them, or running
Thank you.
fireworks shows, or what, because I couldn't even begin to guess. But Alexander liked to store the fireworks on this farm. And I want to be clear what I mean by storage unit. It was basically a shed with a door that locked. Nothing formal, nothing like what you'd see in a city. It was a little room that you could rent by the week or the month, and the tipster said Alexander had used these particular units in the past. So then the police reached out to the farmer who worked at High Craigton, and they were like, is this true? Do random people store stuff on your property? And not only did the farmer confirm that he rented out storage units to different people in Glasgow, he also admitted that Alexander had asked him if he could rent a new one on the afternoon of April 13th, the day after Karen went missing. With that information, the police rushed straight out to High Craigton Farm, basically right then and there. The farmer showed them the shed he'd rented out to Alexander. It had a padlock on it. Not one the farmer provided, but one Alexander had bought on his own. I mean, he really wanted to make sure nobody was getting in. Well, the cops didn't let a cheap padlock stop them. They broke into the storage shed, and inside, they found a blue barrel. It was also padlocked, so that lock needed to be broken too. When they finally pried the barrel open, there was a body inside. Karen's dead body.
Oh my God.
It was already very badly decomposed because it had been sealed up in a fluid that was a mixture including lye, but she was still intact enough to be identified. So, you thought it looked bad for Alexander before? Now there was no getting out of it. No story about Karen hitting her head or getting into some kind of accident. It was April 15th at this point, just 3 days since Karen's murder. The police tracked Alexander down to a Starbucks and detained him. It wasn't an arrest. Apparently in Scotland, you can't arrest someone unless they're formally charged with something. But they did say they wanted to do another interrogation. This time around, Alexander had a different cover story, that he'd murdered Karen in self-defense.
Oh my God.
Yeah, right. Basically, according to Alexander, Karen hit her head and started bleeding on the mattress just like he said before. But apparently, after she got the head injury, she flipped out. She started attacking Alexander in an unprovoked rage. He didn't know what else to do, so he grabbed the nearest weapon he could find, a wrench, and beat
You what?
her to death. Well, the police
Oh my God.
were done playing games. They were sick of the lies. They reminded Alexander that they had a ton of evidence against him, and they'd know if he was telling the truth or not. So, with that little bit of pressure, he gave a full confession. I mean, what else could he do? The evidence doesn't lie. So, needless to say, Karen didn't bump her head on his headboard. She didn't have consensual sex with him in his apartment. She never even made it out of his car alive at all. When Alexander spent those 12 minutes
Oh my God.
and 46 seconds out of sight of the security cameras, that's when he murdered her. He pulled over at the side of the road and he grabbed her neck like he was going to choke her. But he didn't actually strangle her, he just held her down by the throat while he beat her to death
Oh my God. This is crazy as hell.
with a wrench. He literally broke her skull open, and she technically died of bleeding in the brain. It was absolutely brutal. At least it was
Oh my God.
all over within 13 minutes or less. But it was still brutal. Once Karen was dead, Alexander drove down to the park, which is where he dumped her purse. Maybe he really, truly thought the police wouldn't be able to trace it back to him, even though he only lived about a mile away. Next, he took Karen back home and carried her body into his bedroom. He wrapped it up in a sheet and then went to sleep. Seriously. I wish I was joking. Alexander actually
Wow.
slept through the night with the body of the woman he'd murdered in his room with him on his mattress. I guess the only part of this that makes it a little less creepy, and to be clear, it's still really creepy, is that she was wrapped up. But still, the next morning he
I
woke
don't know if that makes it any less creepy.
up, and that's when he started Googling all of the things about cleaning supplies and lye. He ran all over town to buy stuff, including as much lye as he could get his hands on. If you haven't guessed by now, he thought he could dissolve Karen's body in acid, like on Breaking Bad. And that was his entire perfect murder plan, that he'd get away with it by soaking the body in lye.
Oh my God.
Except if you've ever actually seen Breaking Bad, you'll know it's not that easy to actually dissolve a whole adult human corpse. That's what Alexander figured out too.
Yeah, and that's also a television show. So nothing on there is real.
Hard way. After he texted his roommate and learned he had the whole place
If it was real, that whole cast would get arrested for what they were making.
to himself until 8 p.m., he filled the bathtub up with lye. He stripped off all of Karen's clothes so there would be less for the
You didn't watch the episode where the dude falls through the ceiling because they puts him in the bathtub? Oh, hell, this dude is not very bright.
acid to eat through and dropped her nude remains into the tub. Then it was a waiting game. The acid did its thing, eating away at Karen's body, but it didn't dissolve her quickly or completely. It doesn't work that way. If it was that easy, every murderer would be doing this. So while he was waiting, Alexander was
Oh, sweet baby Jesus. Smitten kitten, thank you. So sweet, thank you.
running around.
Let's hit it, y'all. Come on, we can get that goal.
He'd scrubbed the bedroom floor for a while to try to get rid of her blood that had leaked onto it during the night. Then he'd
Sweet
run
Jesus.
back into the bathroom to check on Karen, and she was still there, still intact, still not dissolved. Then he'd run out into the living room and clean up any bodily fluids that might have dribbled through there. Back to the bathroom. Karen was still there. Scrub the bedroom walls. Back to the bathroom. And back and forth like that all day.
What a weirdo.
Couple hours went by, and Alexander was slowly starting to realize that he had to come up with another plan for how to get rid of the body. The acid just wasn't working the way he wanted it to. And he had another problem in terms of his mattress. It was completely soaked through with Karen's blood. and there was no way in hell he was getting those stains out. So Alexander took a knife. He cut Karen's body
Oh my God.
open, literally, slit her all the
Oh, Lord, man. Annie, Elise, what happened? These stories used to be like PG-13. Now they're rated R. Oh, my word.
way from right under the neck between
Okay.
her
Yep.
breasts
Bah,
down
bah,
to the area around her belly button.
oh, Lord.
And then he dropped her back into the tub. Alexander told
What?
the police he did this because he thought it would speed up the dissolving process. Like, maybe it would break her down from the inside out rather than having to go through her skin.
This dude is crazy.
Truly, this was just so dehumanizing and so disrespectful to Karen. By 5 p.m., Alexander had
That?
scrubbed the apartment top to bottom,
The
and he
whole thing is.
still hadn't even begun to get rid of the evidence. The worst of it was in his bedroom, and he was still dealing with the fact that Karen's body was still very much intact in the bathtub. While he'd been out buying all of those cleaning supplies, Alexander had also bought a bunch of padlocks. With the clock ticking and only a few hours to go until his roommate got home, Alexander used one of them to keep his bedroom door shut so no one could get in or out. Then he pulled Karen's body out of the tub. He let all the lye run down the drain. Then he wrapped Karen up in his bedspread and carried her back into his room. And then he spent another night, a second night, sleeping with her wrapped up and dead in his room with him.
Oh, God.
On Monday, he woke up super early, before 5 a.m. Before dawn, he threw the murder weapon, the wrench, into a canal. Then he drove out to High Craigton Farm, found a remote corner
Absolutely insane.
of land, and made a big pile. All of Karen's clothes, the bloody blankets, and all the rags and sponges and things he'd used to try and clean up. Then he dumped hard liquor on top of it all and set the whole pile on fire. On his way back home, he bought even more lye, a big blue barrel, and a drain declogger. I can only assume, based on that last item, that
Wow.
some of Karen's body had dissolved and gone down and jammed the bathtub drain. It's truly so hard to put into words how upsetting that is, how he completely dehumanized her and mistreated her after taking her life. Then he went back to his apartment. This was still in the morning, but not super early. It was around 10 a.m. So maybe his roommates were still asleep, or maybe they'd left for work already. I'm not sure. But whatever the situation, Alexander managed to cram Karen and a bunch of lye into the blue barrel, which he sealed closed. Then he loaded his mattress and some other stuff into the trunk
Wow.
of his car. At one point along the way, before he had the barrel sorted out, he'd laid Karen down on top of a suitcase for a little bit. And now the suitcase was stained with blood and other fluids. So he
Oh,
put the
God.
suitcase in the car too. And a neighbor actually saw him doing all this. At the time, they had no idea that Alexander was trying to cover up a murder or that there was anything worth reporting to the police. But later they did come forward and verify that Alexander had been up to no good that morning.
Oh,
Once he had
sweet
everything loaded up in
Baby Jesus, this dude is nuts.
the car, Alexander drove back to High Craigton Farm again. I've lost track of how many times he'd been there by this point, but he did the same thing he'd done the last time. He made a big pile out of the mattress and even more clothes that had gotten stained, and he burned all of them up too. Then it was back to the apartment again, to finally load the barrel into his car. And again, the neighbor saw all of this going on, but didn't say anything. Alexander went back to the farm, and that's when he went to the guy who worked there and was like, "Hey, can I rent a storage unit from you?" They worked out a deal for him to rent the shed for just 1 week. I don't know what Alexander planned to do at the end of the week, or if he was even thinking that far ahead at all. He agreed to pay £10 for the week, and then he wheeled the barrel into the shed and put a padlock on it. Alexander was out of padlocks by that point, so he had to drive to the store and buy another one. Then he came back and locked up the whole shed. Then came the car wash, which I already covered before, and he was back home by 6 o'clock that evening. But he only got to chill at home for literally a handful of seconds. Pretty much the instant he got back, the police knocked on the door. They wanted to ask some questions, and Alexander told that story about Karen hitting her head on the headboard. All of that, the whole story I just told you, took place over the course of about 36 hours. It's insane. And you may hear all that and think it doesn't sound like Alexander really thought through the murder before he committed it.
Or thought at all, period, ever. Desiree, thank you. Yo, we're almost halfway there. Let's get it.
I mean, if he'd gone out on Saturday night planning to kill someone, you'd think he would have planned more in advance. He would have bought the lye and cleaning supplies earlier. He'd have made sure his roommates were going to be gone before he had a body on his hands.
Yeah, but he sounds like a not the brightest crayon in the box.
He might have booked the storage unit beforehand. I mean, just going by some of the things Alexander did, he did come across as a little panicky. Like this was all some kind of accident or
A little?
something. The truth is, I don't know his motive, and nobody does. He didn't explain why he killed Karen, and if you want to believe a statement that Alexander gave eventually, he doesn't even know. He claimed that he was blackout drunk that night, so he just couldn't remember why he decided to
Oh my God.
do it. Maybe she said something in the 5 or so minutes that she was in the car and he flew into a rage. Or maybe he'd originally been planning a less serious crime, like robbery or sexual assault, and things got out of hand.
Oh my gosh.
Frankly, I don't buy that as an explanation or an excuse. I mean, yes, alcohol can lower your inhibitions. It might make you do something you wouldn't otherwise. But most people don't get drunk and then commit
And then take somebody's life.
murder.
Yeah, exactly. Desiree, thank you.
There is an entire world of difference between getting tipsy and then having a stupid hookup or getting into a screaming match with a friend versus spending 12 or so minutes beating someone to death with a wrench. That was all Alexander, all because he wanted to murder Karen.
Oh my God. Entertainment, educational purposes only, y'all. Cheryl, thank you.
Maybe the alcohol made him feel bold enough to actually go through with it, but he had his reasons, even if he didn't want to share them. And there's another piece to all of this too. This is just my opinion, but it's very obvious to me that Alexander was always planning on killing someone that night. If it hadn't been Karen, it would have been someone else. And
Oh God.
I'm basing this off of the CCTV footage from outside the Sanctuary nightclub. You'll remember this footage was what initially put the police on Alexander's trail in the first place. You'll also remember how earlier I said that Alexander was at the club with a big group of friends. They were all sitting together in a big booth, and at one point in the night, Alexander got up and went outside. He came back in, spent a little more time with the guys, and then went out again. And that second trip outside was when he picked up Karen. Well, we know what he did during that first trip outside thanks to the security cameras. They showed a woman in a pink dress walking out of the club. And then Alexander came out right afterward like he was following her. The woman in pink walked down the street. She had no idea that Alexander was behind her. She wasn't checking back over her shoulder or anything. If she would have seen how incredibly sketch Alexander was acting. He was darting between different cars, almost like trying to hide. And he kept getting closer and closer. It was so obvious that he had something terrible planned. But
oh my God, this dude is crazy.
thank God, before Alexander could actually do anything to her, this woman called a cab and got in. I mean, even the police who watched this clip were like, Alexander was definitely planning to kidnap that woman. The cab saved her, and then he tried again with Karen. And this second time, it worked. So clearly, that was his plan for the night. That was always his intention from the beginning. And it makes me wonder, how far did he go in planning this? Is that the real reason the second cab never showed up to pick up him and his friends at the beginning of the night? Maybe he never actually called it, so he'd have an excuse to drive his own car. Or did he just get to the club, have a couple drinks, and think, okay, tonight's the night. Time to go murder someone? Between the confession, all of the evidence, and all of the things, there was no point in Alexander playing innocent anymore. When his trial was supposed to begin in September of 2015, he pleaded
Oh my God. It says supposed to begin? What the heck happened?
guilty to Karen's murder.
Oh, he just pled guilty. Okay.
His sentence was 23 years to life, which was the strictest sentence that you can get for murder in the UK. At one point, Alexander had also been charged
That
with
is
attempting
crazy. Cheryl, thank you.
to defeat the ends of justice, which is basically their equivalent of what we'd call obstruction of justice. But they withdrew the second charge when he agreed to plead guilty, and you can tell Alexander's judge was pissed about that. She really wanted to give him a harsher sentence, but she couldn't without the additional charges. So instead, she made this speech in the courtroom where she said,
What?
I regret that the Crown, in withdrawing charge 2, has to some extent tied my hands in regards to this sentence.
I find it extremely difficult to find words appropriate to describe the dreadful crime to which you pleaded guilty. Karen Buckley was a young woman in the prime of life. She was a visitor to Glasgow, studying to expand her knowledge in furtherance of her career in nursing. She was a much-loved member of a close and united family. To you, she was a stranger who appears tragically to have accepted a lift in your car. In a matter of minutes, for some unknown and inexplicable reason, you destroyed her young life and devastated a family. Not satisfied with killing her so brutally, you went to extraordinary lengths over several days to cover up your actions by attempting to destroy her body. You also concocted a story to tell the police, and to ensure that you remembered the lies which you had told, you even wrote the story down. Your killing of this young woman, combined with the extraordinary lengths to which you went to cover it up, display the actions of a callous and calculating man. You now, through your counsel, claim to be remorseful. Remorse was, however, only expressed for the first time when you pleaded guilty. From a perusal of the Criminal Justice Social Work report, it is apparent that in the course of your lengthy interviews with the social worker, at no time did you ever demonstrate or express any regret for what you had done. That expression of remorse on the 11th of August might have carried more weight if communicated earlier. And it is difficult, in my view, to envisage someone who's truly sorry for killing another human being going to the lengths to which you went to cover up your appalling crime whilst making up false stories about the deceased.
So that's where things stand. Today, Alexander is about halfway through that sentence. He served 9 of those 23 years, but I want to be clear, 23 years is just when he's up for parole. There's no guarantee that he's going to go free when 2038 rolls around. So I think it's a little too early to jump to the conclusion that he got off super easy. You know who didn't have it easy? Karen's family. At Alexander's sentencing hearing, Karen's father talked about how he was still grieving so hard and he didn't know if he'd ever stop grieving.
Karen is our little angel. She's not suffering now. She's in her new home in heaven.
The father of Karen Buckley struggling to explain the loss his family have suffered. On the steps of the court, they gave their reaction.
What a waste of a young life. It all seemed unreal. We were devastated. And all Karen was doing that night was making her way home when she was randomly targeted and murdered by a cowardly, vicious criminal. He's truly evil, and we hope he'll spend the rest of his life behind bars. Not only did he rob Karen of her precious life and future, he robbed us of our beautiful daughter and sister to the boys. He also robbed us of Karen in debt, as we never got to see her, or hold her, or even kiss her goodbye.
Karen touched so many lives. I think that it was pretty clear. Literally hundreds of people came to her funeral and were lined up around the block. And if she had lived, she would have continued working in occupational therapy and just helping so many people throughout her life. But we know that it didn't work out that way. Instead, she was murdered. Her body was soaked in acid, and she was disrespected in so many intense ways. And nothing will ever make that okay.
Dear God.
How dare you?
That is crazy. That's one of the craziest ones we've heard. Oh my word. YouTube, do me a favor, hit the thumbs up button. Hit the subscribe button. I'll see y'all tomorrow night. It's going to kick you over to the haunted side on YouTube. Go watch some of that.